Hey, it's Alpha Krieger here, and this video gonna explore how to journal like Carl Jung using his active imagination technique. We're gonna explore how to integrate the shadow by working with our projections and how to break free from destructive and repeating patterns. So last week, I mercilessly criticized using shadow work prompts as I don't believe they promote a true dialogue with the unconscious and are often ineffective. However, I never offer anything to replace it, so allow me to redeem myself. Carl Jung created an immense body of work which culminated in his active imagination method. And I think this is the most powerful tool to explore and integrate unconscious contents. And people often discuss this technique only focusing on images and fantasies. However, we can easily enter the same state through writing. In this light, for journaling to be effective, we have to achieve the flow state of automatic writing and let the words flow in the paper. Then we must challenge this material because this is a dialectical procedure between the conscious ego and the unconscious perspective. And one of the immediate benefits of journaling is that it works like exposure therapy, in which we build tolerance and resilience to distressing emotions. However, I believe this technique can go much deeper. If you understand the psychological principles behind this, you will never need to rely on prompts again. And this practice turns into one of the most powerful tools for us to become our own analysts. So now we're going to explore a few psychological principles and then the practical aspects. The first thing you have to realize is that the personal shadow is mainly formed by complexes, and Carl Jung refers to them as the architects of every symptom, and I like to call them the puppet masters due to their compulsive and possessive nature. Whenever you're experiencing a strong emotional reaction, anxiety, depression, and find yourself trapped in toxic relationship patterns, you can bet there is a complex at play. Moreover, complexes distort our interpretation of reality and shape our sense of identity by producing fixed narratives that play on repeat in our minds. And these stories primes us to see ourselves and the world in a certain way, also driving our behaviors and decisions. And the less conscious we are about them, the more power they have over us. And this is so fascinating that there is a huge body of work dedicated to understanding why the same event can affect people in such different ways. I mean, it's common knowledge that what's traumatic and paralyzing from one person can be experienced in an entirely different way by another, who can even become stronger and grow after the same events. This is the power of narrative. This leads us to the most important concept in Jungian psychology, conscious attitude. And this is basically how a person is wired. It's a sum of their belief system, core values, individual predispositions, and their typology. So if they have a more extroverted or introverted orientation, and which one of the four functions guides them: thinking, feeling, sensation, or intuition. And I introduce you to each one of these components in my book Pieces Demystifying Jungian Psychology. You can get a copy when you join my newsletter. Plus, I have a condensed 4-year Jungian psychology curriculum at the Audacity University. So, getting back. To simplify things, conscious attitude is someone's modus operandi. And furthermore, Carl Jung explains that neurosis happens when we adopt a rigid and unilateral conscious attitude. A simple example is to envision someone who is extremely logical, or at least claims to be, and absolutely despises any display of emotion. Well, we all know they tend to be dry and harsh and have a horrible temper and are always possessed by their emotions. And this happens because the unconscious reacts to the conscious attitude. In this example, feelings and emotions are always being repressed and are relegated to the shadow. And the more something is repressed, the more it rebels against us. And the only way it has to be expressed is in a negative and destructive way. And it's important to realize that the shadow isn't bad, it's neutral. It only acquires a dark quality because we judge it as bad and inferior. That's why the key to integrating the shadow is transforming our perception of what's being repressed. Carl Jung constantly emphasizes how the goal of psychotherapy is transforming the conscious attitude, so we can create a more harmonious relationship with the unconscious. As a result, we allow repressed aspects to be integrated to the conscious personality and we become more whole. Moreover, complexes lose their grip over us, and we not only disidentify from destructive narratives, but also take our power back to become a conscious creator of our stories. One of the most important elements of the shadow integration process is learning how to work with our projections, as everything that is unconscious and doesn't have a relationship with the ego is first encountered projected. In that sense, complexes are the main material for our projections, and they are the sum of our experience around a certain theme. The nucleus of a complex is always the individual experience. However, they can be grouped around archetypes, originating the mother and father complex, for instance. And by the way, here's a great video to overcome the mother and father complex. Now, I've seen multiple times people asking how they know if they're projection and if it's possible to stop it. So let's get more practical. The most flagrant sign of a complex operating are overreactions, aka feeling triggered, and compulsive behaviors. It's important to realize that a projection only takes place via a projective hook. In other words, the person in question often possesses the quality you're seeing. However, projection always amplifies it, often to a superhuman or inhuman degree. For instance, for someone who always avoids conflict and has difficulty asserting their boundaries, interacting with a person who is direct and upfront might evoke a perception of them being highly narcissistic and tyrannical, even if they're just being somewhat normal. So here are a few pointers to spot projections. You see the person as all good or all bad. The person is reduced to a single attribute, like being a narcissist or the ultimate flawless spiritual master. You put them on a pedestal or feel the need to show your superiority. You change your behavior around them. Their opinions matter more than your own. You're frustrated when they don't correspond to the image you created about them. And lastly, you feel a compulsion toward them. And I have a whole video on how to overcome limerence and of addiction over here. As you can see, projection significantly reduces our ability to see people as a nuanced human being. However, when we draw a projection, we can finally see the real person. Our emotional reactions diminish as well as their influence over us. And it's impossible to stop projecting entirely because the psyche is alive, and as our conscious attitude changes, the unconscious reacts. However, we can create a healthy relationship with our projections, understanding them as a message from the unconscious. However, withdrawing projections requires taking responsibility and realizing how we often act in the exact same ways we condemn, leading to a moral differentiation. In the case of a positive aspect, like admiring someone's skill or intelligence, we must make it our duty to develop these capacities for ourselves, instead of making excuses. Furthermore, complexes being the basis for our projections also means that we unconsciously seek other people to perpetuate our internalized narratives. The external mirrors our internal dynamics. For instance, someone who always plays the victim will constantly seek a perpetrator to blame. And the only way to end these dynamics is by understanding how we are contributing to keeping them alive. And to achieve that, Carl Jung united both Freud's and Adler's perspective. The first one is always concerned with finding the origins of our symptoms and behaviors. And the basic idea is that once we find the cause and experience a catharsis, the symptoms can be reduced. The second is concerned with understanding what we're trying to achieve with our strategies. For example, adopting people-pleasing and codependent behaviors is often a result of having experienced emotionally unstable parents, whom you always try to appease. On the flip side, keeping these behaviors can also be a way of avoiding taking full responsibility for your life, as you're constantly looking for someone to save you. So time to put everything into practice. Carl Jung used the active imagination method, which basically consists of fully connecting with our affects and allowing the unconscious contents to be manifested, be it through imagery, drawing, or in this case, writing. So first and foremost, it's highly important to understand our conscious attitude, because this will guide how we will engage with the unconscious contents. Moreover, understanding the compensatory nature of the unconscious and both Freud's and Adler's perspectives helps us know which questions to ask. So starting is quite simple. The main objective is to enter the flow state of automatic writing, allowing the unconscious to speak freely. And here are a few departure points that I find helpful. Affects or triggers, dream fragments, a genuine question, spontaneous fantasies, or a narrative or repeating pattern. And as we focus and allow the unconscious to be manifested, we can clearly see the narratives that are shaping our lives. The process in itself is very straightforward. However, most people miss the active part, which is dialoguing with the unconscious material. And this is the fun part, because now you have the chance to understand the origins of these stories and how you're contributing to keeping them alive. And it's important to challenge these perspectives, negotiate with the unconscious, and come up with new solutions. And to achieve that, you can't identify with what's being written. You must see it as a compensatory perspective, and many of the questions used in the therapeutic setting can be applied here. All of the intention to expand our conscious attitude, see ourselves in a new light, and change in the present moment. Now, when we are deep in the process, it's not uncommon to hear voices and start seeing images. We have to remember that complexes are autonomous and often present themselves in a personified form, just like the characters we see in our dreams. And active imagination and automatic writing evoke a mild psychotic state and sometimes open the door to the collective unconscious. And this can be too much for many people. That's why it's important to build a strong ego and learn to emotionally regulate, have good habits, and have real responsibilities before engaging with the unconscious. And if you're struggling with this, here's a great video you can watch later. This leads us to the most important step of all, which is integrating what we've learned in real life. In the past year, I had many active imagination experiences with a sword, and after exploring the symbolism, I understood that I was being called to write. So I changed my schedule, rearranged clients, and even my business structure so I could write as often as possible. And that's how my book Pistis came to be. And that's also why I chose the sword and snake to be on the cover, representing arrows and logos. Lastly, all of this theory means nothing if we don't take practical action and integrate it in real life. Every time we engage with the unconscious, our responsibility increases. So if you want a step-by-step to integrate the shadow that follows Carl Jung's original method, I invite you to check my best-selling and accessible course Katabasis The Shadow Integration Manual. You can also come directly to the Audacity University and access a condensed 4-year Jungian psychology curriculum to either become your own analyst or integrate it into your coaching or therapeutic practice. You can learn about the psychodynamics of the shadow integration, the individuation process, the psychological types, dream interpretation, the animus and anima, and even active imagination. Lastly, you can get a copy of my book Pistis, Demystifying Jungian Psychology when you join my newsletter. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.